Welcome to Talk Advocacy to Me, the podcast that dives deep into the world of customer advocacy and loyalty. I'm your host, Liz Richardson, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, Deena Zenyk. We're the co-founders of Captivate Collective, and we're here to spark your curiosity and fuel your passion for all things customer advocacy. Each episode, we tackle hot and pressing customer engagement topics for the advocurious to the seasoned pro. So let's dive in and talk advocacy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talk Advocacy to Me, where we talk about one question regarding customer advocacy and engagement. And today we'll be tackling what's the right team for customer content creation. A hot topic because everyone seems so very focused on continuing with the customer content creation, which we are, of course, fans of. We're bringing in the experts today. So aside from my lovely co-host, Deena Zenyk, who is here as always, co-founder of Captivate Collective, I have brought on here Sam Shepler and Dan Kalmar from Testimonial Hero. Sam, of course, is the CEO and founder of Testimonial Hero. So he is a huge believer in customer content, I'm assuming, Sam. And I love that reaction. Dan's like, I'm not sure, maybe he's just trying to make some money. But, I think he's actually a huge believer in this. And of course, we know that because Testimonial Hero has been helping companies like Intercom, HubSpot, and Meta create that customer story and bring it to the forefront through video. And super excited to introduce Dan Kalmar here today as well, the creative director at Testimonial Hero, because Dan and I go way back, and he is a master of written customer story. So I'm super excited to have you both now together as a dynamic duo, much like Deena and myself. So welcome, Sam and Dan, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Liz and Deena. It's a pleasure to be here, and excited to talk shop today.
Yeah, awesome. So, Dan, any words of wisdom before we start? I've told everyone you're funny. Can you say something?
Oh, I don't like it when people say that. It's just like you started. The bar's too high. It's like dance monkey dance. Like I got to come up with like a joke about like customer marketing or something like that. Like
I totally get it. I used to sing. That's actually what my major was in.
Oh.
And people will always be like,
"Oh, sing us a song then, Liz. I hear you're a great singer. Why don't you start off with a song about customer content? Like, see, how does it feel? How does it feel to raise that bar?"
Exactly. And, I should have warned you. Dan, tell us a joke. All right. But aside from all joking, we are very excited about this topic. Inevitably, we do a lot of customer engagement strategy. Inevitably, customer content becomes part of that conversation. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So I think really the conversation here is, and I know we have this title of what's the right team. We're also talking about what's the right strategy and what's the right skill makeup to execute that strategy today. And I just want to kick it off with where do we think we are with customer content at this point? Like what's the arc maybe been of customer content, and where do we think we are at as far as a turning point today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll take this one first. I think really what we're seeing is, back in the old days, or even 5 years ago, if you had a couple of case studies on your website, you were basically par for the course, or, you're doing great. And today we're just at a more mature place when it comes to customer content. And, specifically specifically and buyers are expecting more different types of content when they, come to your customer's page. They're expecting to be able to consume content every way that they want to consume it, whether that's video, written, infographic, and image. So I suppose you could say we've just like with any industry or marketing function, it's become a bit more mature, and the bar has been raised because of that.
Yeah, I think we can. Deena, doesn't this sound a lot like where we started with advocacy and the whole idea of, okay, there's so much advertising noise, there's so much corporate noise, we have to break through with the customer voice. And now it's almost like everyone bought into that because, of course, it makes absolute sense. But now there's a lot of advocacy and customer voice out there. It's a really interesting cycle.
It is, yeah. And, what people are looking for in that customer story is so diverse as well. So it's not just the format or the types or who's telling the story, but what is it in the audience base or the prospect base that has changed? What are they looking for in customer stories? I think has evolved as well.
Yeah.
And I think that we're still, I think the exciting thing is that we're still early days of it. Like when we look at like the kind of product adoption, like, you know, the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, like I don't feel like we've crossed that chasm yet. I think when I go on a lot of companies' websites, they're still not tapping into the voice of their customer. Like they maybe have some customer like logo slapped on the landing page, but I view it like, to talk about what Sam had said, like the bar has been raised. I think it's an issue of it's necessary yet insufficient. Like I think you just have to be tapping into the customer voice. I think that's just kind of table stakes. But while not everybody's doing it, I think enough people are doing it that the bar has been raised, which is good or bad for you as a marketing team. I think it's bad because it's harder to do things that are higher quality, but I think it's good for us to be challenged and thinking about how we can do this at a higher quality.
I agree, Dan. I like how Sam said a long time ago, or like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I
like long time, like we're talking like the 50s. Is that what you're talking about?
But I know what Sam is saying, because it's like, we'll say like, in the olden days of advocacy 10 years ago. So there's still just, it is such a young type of practice still. Customer marketing itself is very young, and we're still figuring that out. But we do have a lot of people who agree that, okay, the best way for us to tell our story is through our customers. I think everyone agrees with that. But to your point, Dan, I think that's really apt. It's like we do all agree with that. It is much harder to do than to just agree. Like we get the logic, and it's very sound, but actually executing that, I think, is quite difficult. And there's a lot of moving parts, and I think there's still maturation to go on there. But to Deena's point, it's a lot about now, like, how exactly do we have to go about telling those stories? And that is going through a lot of change, I think. And you guys are seeing this, of course, because this is what you do. You tell customer stories. So what are people doing to cut through that customer content noise?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that we've been a fan of is taking more of a campaign based approach and really developing a customer content brand. Dan, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that though, so I'll flip it over to you there.
Yeah, I think on the high end, I think that's what people should aspire to. Like I think of certain companies like Gong, or like they just do such an amazing job of like content that like anytime I'm on LinkedIn, like it shows up my feed, like I know it's Gong. But I think for a lot of people, it's not. You got to walk before you can run. It's hard to like get all the way up there. And one thing that I think people can do that's a lot more attainable is thinking about this more as a campaign thing instead of just one-offs. Like what a lot of people do is they have a customer who raises their hand to do a case study, whether, you know, written or video testimonial, and then they just do it. Or they get told like, hey, we need a case study in financial services, and they just do it. And the problem, I think, is kind of a couple problems with that. I think one, it's really hard to scale that to the level that you need. Like it's hard to get enough content because people don't want to do it. They don't want to be part of this. And then it's also just not super engaging a lot of the times, right? Like you produce this case study, and then what happens? You just slap it up on your site and pat yourself on the back. So the example that I love to share with a mutual client of ours is Amplitude. And last year they did this AHA campaign. If anybody wants to check it out, it's amplitude.com/AHA, like AHA. And they did this campaign where it was all about like, what was the aha moment you had with Amplitude? What was like the unexpected benefit that the unexpected insight you got from your customers using your app or website? And then what did you do with it? Like, what did you then tweak with your landing page or whatever? And then what was the impact? And they launched this whole campaign around it where they got some incredible brands like Fender, the guitar company, Dropbox, Spirit Airlines, and they did these ridiculously high production value videos. I think most people are going to look at these videos and be like, I don't have the budget to do that. I think you can do something really cool with a lot less budget, as a side note. But from there, they then did a whole bunch of different content, right? Like Deena talking about, you kind of need to like do different things, kind of hit people where they're at. As Sam had said, they did written stories that were first person stories written from the customer. They did like an ebook from it. And what ends up happening there is you solve for a lot of those problems I talked about earlier, is you get people wanting to be part of this, which a lot of times is one of the hardest parts about customer content, is getting customers in the first place to say yes. People want to be part of some really cool campaign like that. And then for you, it just helps you stand out in a really crowded, attention economy where everybody's kind of just doing regular case studies. But this is something that's really cool and high production value. And it's done in a lot of different forms, longer form, shorter form. And it just really helps you develop this campaign around something that's super interesting that not most people are doing. And when you can do like 10 customers like that, I mean, for a lot of people, that's like a year's worth of content that they got done in like a month or two. So I think that's one example of something that people can do, that it's focusing on, I think, kind of two key things. One, doing it at a really high level, and that can look different for different people with different budgets. But then two, trying to find slightly differentiated ways of doing things. It doesn't have to completely reinvent the wheel, but yeah, that's just one example that I tend to share over and over again.
I think it's a really good example. I don't think many people maybe have sat down and thought about a customer content brand. So we do a lot of work with our customers around a customer advocacy or customer programs brand, right? Because we're finding that that's necessary, because there's a million customer programs out there now. Maybe not a million, but there's a lot. And you do have to figure out, why would the customer want to be involved in your programs versus the 10 other software tools that they are now utilizing. And so putting brand on something is extremely powerful. And this is just like basics of marketing 101, right? Like, we know that brand is a powerful thing. So creating that package around it, I love that idea. And I love what you said, Dan, about how it also attracts customers to be more like, hey, that is a cool, snazzy looking campaign. I would love to be part of that campaign and create some of that desire. So you're not always fishing, because we know fishing is a huge part of customer content. I just love that. So anyone have any tips on this call? Because we've got 4 pretty seasoned people here on this call. How do you... What I know Amplitude did their very cool AHA campaign. How do you come up with, maybe thinking through, what is that customer content brand?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you have to, be honest with yourself around like, what is the real fit for your particular product and your company. I think like the AHA one works for Amplitude because of their, I believe, their focus on like analytics and insights, right? So I think it's not kind of copying anyone else. It's really figuring out, being honest with yourself and being like, how do I like tie this into the value that my customers get from the product?
Yeah.
And to your point, Liz, like make it something they're like excited to participate in, and that intuitively makes sense to them. Yeah.
I love that. Go ahead, Deena. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it for me, it comes back to content with purpose, creating content with intention, content that has a plan. And so for the AHA campaigns, many pieces of content feeding into this campaign, which others are now trying to replicate because it's such a great idea. But even just for a single piece of content, thinking about a single piece of content and what the campaign is for that piece of content, sometimes that piece seems to get missed. It's like, well, I have to create 10 case studies this quarter, so I'm going to go ahead and create those, and my motion ends when it gets posted on the website. But it's kind of like the so what and what now. It seems to get missed, and the AHA campaign, of course, in a bigger and high polish sense of the word campaign, really hits the mark.
Well, I think you touched on something really important there when you said a lot of people just start with like, I need 10 case studies. And I think you're right. Like, that's the wrong place to start. You really need to start with, what are your gaps in content? Like, what do you need? And then how do you help fill that gap with the voice of your customer? Like, I used to work at an ed tech company, and everybody there was very academic, and people would always come to the content marketing team and they're like, we need a white paper about this. And I'm like, stop saying the word white paper. Like, first of all, not everything should be a white paper. Second of all, most things should not be a white paper. But like, tell me the thing we are trying to solve for. Like, we have this gap. We don't have any content around this.
Mhm.
Tell me what you need solved, and then we can figure out how do we fill that. Like, does it need to be a video? Does it need to be a written story? Does it need to be short form? Does it need to be long form? Like, you can figure that stuff out. And a lot of times you'll get that once you uncover the customer who can help with that. But like, don't start with, we need a video, we need a case study. Like, start with like, what are those gaps? And then you can try to figure out the innovative ways to fill it.
That's a really good pivot into strategy. And just want to also comment on, we were talking about an example that used a lot of stories and was high production. And thank you, Eric, who's listening, who posted the link. I really appreciate it. And by the way, I always forget to say, if you have questions on the podcast, feel free. I will try to field them, or you can leave them for our guests later. But also, a campaign can be one story shared many different ways, right? Like, if you have a really great story, it's not necessarily a conglomeration of stories. Like, one story, to Deena's point, what is the thought behind that one story, and what are you going to do with it? I do think it is really surprising how many organizations still do just count the number of stories rather than creating actual campaigns around those stories and understanding what they're trying to drive with that story, and then measuring the result of that. And so that really just naturally takes us into, okay, so how should I be thinking about building a strategy? So we talked about, okay, this campaign element, and then we've talked about using content in many different ways, understanding how people want to digest that content. So let's talk about, what types of content do organizations really need to be thinking about creating when they're talking about storytelling? And it, like Dan said, it's probably not a white paper most of the time. I can't remember the last time I sat down and read a white paper, but
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as a video person, I'm admittedly a little bit biased, but I do.
No, Sam, not you.
Yeah, not me. I do think, there is a lot to taking a video first approach, because if you can capture, the stories on video, you can still create all the other assets downstream of that, which is incredibly valuable. But obviously you can't really go in the reverse. You can't start written and still have a great video with a real person on it, if you didn't get that. So just, practically speaking, whenever you can, taking a video first approach is super key. And I think I always like to say, like, video first, but not video only, because there are, definitely negatives to video, being it's a bigger commitment. You can't just skip it. You can't just skim it. And a lot of people like to just, skim and read the headers and then dive in if they want. Video, you actually have to watch it. So yeah, I think video first, but not video only. And then you can kind of capture a little bit more breadth along the entire buyer journey, where you can have, your 30-second, video early on. Maybe you have your case study, you have your longer videos, and then you have your more topical specific videos around certain questions, fears, or doubts that buyers have, more like objection crushers once you get to that stage in the sales process. So yeah, from my end, I think it's video first, but not video only is the best way to make the most of that really important opportunity when you actually get a customer who's willing to advocate for you, and to make the most of their time as well.
We follow the same type of process, Sam. So, taking an interview by video, like this podcast. Let's just take this podcast, for example. We have a content flywheel off of this podcast. We record these, well, we put them live. So thanks for everyone joining live. We love having you here. We then have the recording, which goes to Spotify, also the video recording, which goes to our Vimeo page. We then, when we're really good, right, we would maybe create a written story off of it, but we also create video snippets that we can use on social, right? So there's a whole flywheel of content that comes off of even just this podcast. And I think that that's really important, all the way to, in my opinion, like just a quote coming out of that as part of that story that makes people want to engage and learn more about where that story goes. So I think that we are very aligned that it cannot be a one and done type of thing. Plus, what a waste of effort. There was just so much effort that went into creating that story. And so if you're not thinking in a campaign fashion about where all that story can show up and in ways it needs to show up, you're missing out on so much goodness from that story. But then and I want to take a little veer right here because we have a question from Andrew. And I think it's a really practical question. So he's asking, when you're asking a customer, though, to do a story, so you're going to do an interview, how do you reach out to one group, or maybe it's a champion, and maybe not alienate or make other people at the organization feel like they're not as much part of the story? Have you guys ever run into that? And do you have any tips?
Maybe I'll jump in here. I don't know that I've seen it happen a lot where other people get like offended that they weren't asked. I think that people kind of get that like maybe this person was like the most in the weeds with the product, or they really needed a high level perspective, so they got the VP of sales or the CEO to do a video. I mean, I think like one solution there is ideally you can do content with multiple different people, right? Like I think there's something to be like, people often ask, like when we're doing case studies or we're doing videos, like should it be the CEO, should it be somebody more boots on the ground? And I think the first place is like figure out what you need, like where are the gaps in your content? Do you have like a ton of stuff that's high level but not enough people actually using the product? Like, okay, start there. But ideally you get a lot of different voices. Like you get people who can talk about the high level business impact of this, but they're probably not the people who are actually using the product. And then you get the people who are using the product and can talk about like, I'm in this every day. Here's why it's so beneficial for me as the boots on the ground person. Like that's not going to speak to the people who are ultimately signing on the dotted line, but it speaks to those influencers. So I think the short thing is ideally talk to different people, get different perspectives. Even if you don't have the budget to do a video with everybody, even if you can just do a video with one person, get a quote from a few other people, that can really help balance that out. Because just like you need a lot of different content types, you also need a lot of different use cases and perspectives within that same organization. So that's probably where I would start with it.
Thanks for answering that, Dan. I once saw Deena, you were going to talk.
Well, I just had a follow-through question. So if you have an example, Liz, and then I'll pop up with my question.
I was just going to say, I once saw a really cool piece of content. It was a video case study, and they had involved different roles within the organization. And you could actually go, like they had a chapter title, and you could go click to the voice that most resonated with your role as part of that story. And I think that's really clever. So I agree, Dan, if you can bring in all those perspectives, it's a more well-rounded story. You can also break apart all of those and create specific assets that are really geared towards specific audiences.
Like same story, different angle.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. My follow-through question, because we have you two super experts here, is really practical. And that is, what are your tips and tricks for actually getting people to participate in customer evidence opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a question that everyone has. I have a couple of things here, and then Dan, I'll let you, kind of weigh in as well. First, I think on the video side, we've kind of talked a little bit about video budgets. We've talked about on-site filming, but we haven't really mentioned remote filming, right? Obviously, we're all here remotely right now. And I think, more and more, remote testimonials, remotely produced video testimonials, when done correctly, can look just as good as an on-site testimonial. When they're captured, especially when it's off someone's smartphone. And I think this is like something we all kind of realize, but like just how crazy good, smartphones in particular are getting. And like it's getting to the point where customer advocacy teams, have the opportunity, again, like if it's done correctly, they can capture a incredibly high quality remote video testimonial for a fraction of the cost of an on-site testimonial and a fraction of the logistics as well. So I think this ties into just making the ask a little bit easier, right? maybe it's just easier for someone to say yes to hopping on a remote call for an hour versus having to have a film crew come into their office and kind of be the center of attention. Some people love that. Some people don't want to be the spotlight, in the spotlight in their office, right? So I think like giving people a variety of ways to participate, and increasingly, if you're going to do video, like doing it remotely, is just a much easier ask of people.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add there is I think you just need to find some way to make there has to be something in it for the customer, right? Like if you just position it as an ask, sometimes people will say yes, but it's not as enticing as finding some way to incentivize them. And that can look like different things, right? Like some people are like, oh, we work under their contracts and give them a discount. That can work, but I feel like you don't get the best stories out of that. Like you want people who are excited to tell their story, not people who are required to like contractually. Sometimes it can look like giving people incentives, whether it's a gift card or a donation to a charity if they can't accept gift cards, and that again can kind of work. But I think the most effective way is to try to tap into some sort of intrinsic motivator, whether it's like we talked about with the AHA campaign. Something like that people want to be part of because they get to be showcased among other experts and positioned as, hey, we weren't these helpless idiots and then your company came in and saved us. It was really like, let me show you how we used whatever solution to be innovators in our industry. And a lot of people want to be part of that. So if you position these stories and you're doing these stories correctly, I think you can showcase people in that light and still show why your SaaS solution or whatever it is great. And then it's just, like finding something to give them where they feel like they're going to share their expertise with other people in their industry. And they're really big on that. Like that's really big among like developers and stuff like that. They have this whole thing about just like wanting to, the high tide raises all ships. Like you have to tap into something, and like the gift cards and that kind of stuff can work. And I'm not saying don't ever use those things, but I think the better thing is like help showcase them, put them up on this pedestal, put the spotlight on them, or find some other thing that speaks to like their ego is probably the best way to think about it.
I would say I would rather give a gift after the fact, like a gift card or a gift where it's not the incentive. It's a genuine thank you very much gratitude. I think when we talked about a customer content brand, I just love that phrase, and thank you guys for bringing it because I love it. But it's also doing a good job of showing, like sometimes we don't do a good job of showing why this would be a great thing for you to be a part of. So one newer trend that we are seeing and where we've done some work with our clients is putting together customer collaboration lookbooks, for lack of a better term. But this is, hey, presenting to the customer, here's all the ways you can collaborate with us to tell your story. And that can be something as simple as give a testimonial and sign off with your company that we can use that, or your logo, all the way to come do a video with us or come speak at a roundtable or an event with us. And then you could actually show them examples of how that has done great things for other people when they have participated. So you could literally have a picture of, here's this LinkedIn post where this story kind of really blew up because this person's CEO shared it, and look at all the so it just shows some proof that there is some value in going through, because it is a lot of work, especially for those in large organizations. They have to go through a lot of red tape to just even get the permission to speak and to use their brand's name publicly. So you do want to make sure there's enough incentive there. And that's why so many stories, I think, kind of die at some point, because there's just not enough to make that champion go like, okay, I'm going to be willing to fight for this and make it all the way to the end of the road.
I'd love to see some stats on how, because, a lot of companies do write it into their contracts. I'd love to see some real life stats on how successful that play actually is in getting, decent customer stories. We'll give you a discount now for a story later play.
Well, and I think the interesting thing would be not just how many get done, because I think that like it probably is more effective at getting people to say yes. But like when you look at your top performing stories, is it somebody who had it contractually obligated to do it, or is it because they actually had a good story to tell and wanted to tell it? Like
no one wants
I would say that it's going to be the people who had better stories and wanted
I'm
to
watching Sam like bite at the bit because I know he has a slightly different point of view on this. I remember
everybody has to be contractually obligated to do everything.
So yeah, no, it's such a good question. I guess I'll share my side, and it would be interesting for us to pull some data. I do know that a lot of we have a lot of clients who have a lot of success with it, and are creating really good stories. I think the big difference is obviously, and this is my opinion, in how when we use it is like we never ever hold it over someone's head. It's more of a thing like, hey, like it's just a way to restart the conversation. I think like, and even when I ask for it, because like sometimes people just ask for a discount, and like it can be be like, all right, well, fine, we'll give you this discount if you do this pending complete satisfaction, right? I think like the key thing is like, if in the times that we've done it, like we would never call it in if they wouldn't do it anyways for us. So then it becomes, it just becomes a way to broach the conversation easier. Like, hey, remember that thing we talked about? But like, is it necessary? No. And I also do see your point, Deena, where it's like, if people are using it the wrong way and holding it over people's heads, it's, I think to your point, it's like very misguided. It can become a very misguided way to approach.
Sam, yes. I mean, I think when people are asking for free things, there can be, I mean, that is an easy, way to pivot that conversation. I think maybe one thing though that it could lead content creators who are maybe not as experienced down the path of what we talked about. You're not thinking in campaign, you're thinking of like, where's the easiest or the least path of resistance, not necessarily what's the best story that we can possibly tell. I have to pivot us because I want to get to what the title of this episode is called. So, all right. So we've talked about all these things. I'm going to break it down. We've talked about having the creative element of a brand content, a content brand, a customer content brand. We've talked about having an overarching strategy, which I actually think isn't happening at a lot of organizations. Just going to say that. We talked about having what we would call syndication. So when you have a piece of content, what's the form that it would take? Which channels would that piece of content live in? What are the right stories for those types of pieces of content? So having that all mapped out. And then we've talked about video, we've talked about written, we've talked about maybe social graphics. And then there's the interviewing, there's gifting, like there's a lot of elements that go on to this. And so we promised with this episode, we would talk about what's the skill sets that have to be on your content team. And I think this is where you guys should definitely have something to share here, is like, what are those skill sets that you need to have wonderful stories created?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and basically I think what we've got at is like, it's really hard to fill that skill set with one single person. Even if that person full-time job is creating customer stories. It's like, are they a graphic designer? Are they a video editor? Are they a executive producer? Are they a writer? So it's like, I think you really need, it's very hard to execute at a high level without multiple people. And for me, I think it just comes down to giving the complexity and the respect it deserves, and not trying to just throw one junior person at it and say, you do it this all. Like, support your, hopefully, marketing leaders out there can, support their teams with the resources they need, because it is a varying degree of skill sets. And it's unlikely that a single person is going to be able to do it all at a very high level.
Yeah. And not to mention campaign ideation, content strategy. There's a lot that goes into that. What would you add, Dan?
Yeah, I think Sam hit the nail on the head. I think it's just about realizing that every step of it is so crucial. Like, you look at the first step of any of this stuff, it's like interviewing. I think most people think that they're good interviewers, but they're not. They're like, oh yeah, you ask open-ended questions. That's the secret. Everybody thinks they're good interviewing, is you just ask open-ended questions. And then you see somebody who's a really good interviewer and you're like, oh, okay, that's actually a skill set. Like at Testimonial Hero, this is obviously different because we're like purpose built for this, but like our interviewers, we call them creative producers, it is their full-time job to be interviewers. Like we have people who all day long, all they do is interview people because it is such a specialized thing. And especially with video, I mean, like you can kind of get away with it sometimes in written, like, cause you can fix a lot of things in post, but like you can't put words in people's mouths. So if you don't get a good interview, it's really hard to make great video content out of that. So I think it's just realizing that every single step of it is so important. And that's why ideally you bring in expertise in that. But if you can't, I think it's about just realizing that every step is so important and trying to train each step to get better, right? Like you can teach people and give people resources to be better interviewers, to be better video editors, to do like every step of this. So it's like, yeah, obviously, like, you know, somebody like Testimonial Hero exists. We can help you with this. But if you don't have the budget to do that, you're trying to do it in-house. I think it's just realizing that every step is so crucial, and how can you help your team get better at every step, and then maybe bring in outside expertise where you, if you have budget for that and you just can't do it in-house.
Yeah, it might, like, so for, I know at our former job, Dan, you got called in to do a lot of interviewing and hosting because you are naturally good at that. Sometimes it might be looking outside of your team if you don't have the resources on your team to find people who are skilled at that. But since you guys are experts in this field, I did want to ask, you know, let's say when you guys work with organizations, obviously they're outsourcing story creation to you, but what are the pieces when you work with an organization that really just can't be outsourced?
All of it? Is it selfish to say all of it? No, I think one thing that, you know, we've been thinking a lot about how we position this to people is that you're like, when we're working with a client, they bring so much to the table, right? I mean, for starters, we can't identify their customers for them, right? Like they need to bring those customers to us, but they know their brand and their customers better than we ever will. So they have that expertise, but there's also a missing piece where like, they're just not going to have in-house people who have done as many video and written stories as us. They're not going to have people who have interviewed as many people as us. So I think it's about understanding like, what's your wheelhouse? Like you bring that product knowledge that we're never going to have, but then how do you complement that with a team of experts who also bring an outside perspective? Because even just having outside eyes helps. Like there's this thing called the curse of knowledge where like you just know your stuff better than everybody, but that actually works to your detriment because you can't kind of see how outside people are seeing it. So yeah, I think it's just like understanding, okay, what can we do in-house? Where are we the experts in this? But being honest with yourself that like, yeah, an interview team who's done 1,500 interviews is probably going to have better interviewers, like writers who have done 2,000 case studies or video editors who have done 3,000 videos. They're probably going to be better at those parts than us. Sam, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Agree with that. I think the other thing that came to mind, well, obviously, like really happy customers, right? That makes our job really easy, and that is always going to be the best thing, right? Is when the customers are, and hopefully all the customers are, but you know, and the other thing I think is like, what's the end result that we want to achieve, and like the problem we want to solve with this. Coming back to Dan's points earlier about like solving a real business problem, like our team doesn't know, aren't experts in their business like they are. So, you know, we do need all of our clients to be clear, and we kind of push them to, you know, hone in on this and like crystallize this. Is like, why are we telling this customer story, and what is the business problem that we want to, and what does the perfect story sound like or look like, right? So we always work backwards to achieve that. But we do need the client, and whether or not you outsource this, I think it's crucial, right? It's like the whole like begin with the end in mind principle, where it's like the clearer that you can define the outcome, the better you'll be able to, you know, take all the steps to get to that in your customer stories.
Yeah, we would agree with that. I think the main takeaway that we've come to today is where to start. And I think where to start is you need to know what you're solving for, and to try to get away from this idea of, okay, my boss has told me I need to create 3 customer stories, so I'm just going to go tick those 3 boxes and call my job done. But really to start thinking more strategically to get past that customer content noise, because it's just so funny how things come around. It's not going to be good enough to just have a story. It's not even going to be good enough to just have a video anymore. There's the way that video is portrayed to cut through the noise. Maybe there are techniques, I'm sure, from a video perspective that work well, but then it's also, how am I presenting that story and the problem that we're trying to solve to impact the organization? And so you do have to know what you're starting for. Strategy is an overused word, but I believe that you need to have a strategy for your storytelling. I know Deena agrees with me. I see her nodding.
I do. Have a plan.
Start with a plan. Try to get away from the frenzy, I think, of just like, I need 10 stories. And so let me go find 10 customers who want to do it.
And I would say feel empowered to push back on that. Ask questions when you get those requests for just like a number, a volume of stories. Feel empowered to ask why, what, how, and champion to get a plan in place. And I think a lot of organizations are so entrenched in like, we need the number of these, that feeling empowered to ask those questions shouldn't be seen as a bad thing or a risky thing, but rather a good thing and a strong thing for you.
Awesome.
100%.
Well, I think we've had a lot of wisdom today. So, hey, you know what? If you're online and you disagree with anything we said, we're happy to hear that. Or if you agree, we'd love to hear that as well. Hear your own perspective. If there are questions, I'm sure that Dan and Sam. Ooh, that's fun. Dan and Sam will be happy to go answer those in the chat. But thank you, Dan and Sam. It's wonderful always to talk to people who are kind of dedicated to just customer storytelling. We always love to hear that perspective. And I'm sure that we'll want to tap in and hear more, tactics and tools and strategies moving
Maybe
forward.
a white paper. On this.
I'll get started on a white paper for you.
Sure
It'll start with some jokes. That's all I do. Funny guy.
Funny guy. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll see you on the next Talk Advocacy to me.
Bye, guys. Bye, Liz. Bye, everyone.